everyone. I am Reverend Meg Biddle. I serve as the National Coordinator of Ministry Life and the American Baptist Personnel Services at the American Baptist Home Mission Societies here in King of Prussia. And I am here today with Dr. Pamela Cooper-White, who will be part of the Spiritual Caregivers Conference, which takes place just before the actual Space for Grace conference starts. And that's going to be held in Kansas City in September. So we invite all of you to come and join us for that conference. Dr. Cooper-White has an amazing biography. So I do urge you all to go to Union Seminary and read the entire thing because she's just an amazing. It's amazing. Like I want to do things like this when I grow up, kind of thing. But Dr. Cooper-White is Vice President of Academic Affairs and has just finished a term as Dean at Union Seminary. And she is also continuing as the Christiane Brooks Johnson Professor of Psychology and Religion at Union Seminary. But before all of that starts over again, Dr. Cooper-White is going to enjoy a little bit of a sabbatical. So, Dr. Cooper-White, thank you so much for joining us today. I would invite you to tell those who don't know you a little bit more about you, and we'll just chat from there.
Okay, well, thank you so much for the invitation today. It's been a pleasure getting to know you in the last half hour as we kind of primed the pump together. One of the real pleasures of being on sabbatical, as I always tell people, when you're a seminary professor, sabbatical doesn't mean that you're on vacation. It means that you are focusing on the work that when you're in the full throttle of academic life, you don't have the chance to do. And one of the pleasures of this sabbatical is that I do get to get out and travel more and be with folks, as I will be in Kansas City, and talking about my passions around pastoral theology, how to do good pastoral care, and all of the other things that go along with my research interests in psychology and religion. And so it will be a good time for all of us, I think. I'm looking forward to it.
Great. I'm so glad that you get to be a part of it, and that people actually get to see one another in person, coming back from COVID.
Yes.
And so hopefully that will just be a great time of renewal and edification for everyone. So as we were talking earlier, you've written some really amazing books. The one that popped out at me was The Cry of Tamar. But you were also telling me about some of the other books that you have in the works. Would you like to share a little bit about that?
Sure. Well, The Cry of Tamar was my first book in pastoral theology, and it really is a crossover book into social ethics and public theology. It's come out in a second edition. The subtitle is about is violence against women and the church's response. And I was involved for many, many years in doing trainings with congregations and with pastors and lay leaders on how to respond to situations of violence against women. And more recently, put together a compendium of essays that were written as outgrowths of that book called Gender Violence and Justice with Whippenstock. And so I've kept my hand in that work, which has been very much a work of both education and advocacy. And I would say that pretty much all of what I've written, even though it has moved into different arenas. So, for example, the books that I've written on doing pastoral care and counseling and psychotherapy and those kinds of more clinical books, and then the Cry of Tamar and the work I've done on violence against women, and now gender-based violence, which expands beyond simply looking at the binary male-female gender, but looking at violence against all essentially non-male genders. And then most recently revisited an old scholarly love of mine, which was the early history of psychoanalysis and religion and the Holocaust and the impact of anti-Semitism on the very origins of psychoanalysis, which is theoretically at the foundation of everything we've done in 20th century pastoral care and counseling, even in ways that we've departed from it, the understanding of the unconscious. And in a nutshell, I truly believe that psychoanalysis and the understanding that there's always more beneath the surface than can be seen, and that there needs to be appreciation for unconscious dynamics, could not have come from a majority dominant political or social or cultural advantage. That the fact that these first analysts were Jews on the margins of a very anti-Semitic society in Austria and then spreading throughout Europe, that theory could not have happened without coming from people on the margins who knew they had to get under the surface of things, even simply to survive in such an oppressive climate. So that historical work also has its own impetus behind it in social justice. And then my newest book, which is quite a departure. I was actually asked by Fortress Press to write it. It wasn't on my radar screen as something I was planning to write, but it's called The Psychology of Christian Nationalism. And the subtitle is Why People Are Drawn In and How to Talk Across the Divide, which of course, these days in America, we are in intense polarization, which gets into our congregations, it gets into our communities, it gets into our family life. And how do we maintain our own position, our own sense of the ways in which Christian nationalism has distorted Christianity and in many ways co-opted and exploited evangelicalism? And how do we get behind that and understand how people are drawn into that and still be able to talk to them with love? So that's kind of a really quick overview of some of the things I've been interested in over the years.
I think especially with the Christian nationalism book coming out, I mean, what could be more appropriate, more needed than that conversation, really? Um, do you, without giving away all the book, but go into the how to have these conversations with others, with your churches, with your families,
Mm-hmm.
kind of thing, because I think there's that worry, is it safe to have this conversation, kind of thing. Do you work and approach that in your book?
Yeah, the whole final chapter is devoted to that. But not in the sense of we can all just hold hands and appeal to Christian unity, because that is a way sometimes of glossing over injustices. And, what we've seen, in fact, in the Southern Baptist Convention with the years and years of cover up of back to my other topic of sexual abuse, it all goes hand in hand, that we need to confront rhetorics of injustice, but at the same time, we can do that in ways that actually my training as a therapist and a pastoral caregiver has helped me to do. And I will say it's been particularly poignant's not even the right word. The January 6th hearings that have been going on, the very first paragraph of my introduction is a discussion of January 6th, 2021, and how for us as Christians, it has been so disturbing to many of us to see these signs, Jesus saves, and pictures of Jesus Christ and a giant cross, and people blowing shofars, calling themselves the Jericho March, in there amid the mob. That kind of twisting of Christianity for a political right-wing cause is extremely distressing. So I'm not pulling any punches in the book about what I think Christian nationalism is. I think it's corrosive of democracy and it's anti-Christian. Actually, if you look at the ways in which the Bible is used, the gospel of Jesus Christ and love and justice is almost never discussed. It jumps from a wrathful God, as these folks have read the Hebrew Bible, which is not the predominant way I read the Hebrew Bible. It jumps right over the Gospels to an apocalyptic vision of the end of days, in which Christian nationalists believe America needs to be the head of the spear in bringing about Jesus' second coming as a warrior to overturn what they see as the decay of the world. And so I can't simply say, oh, I agree with you. Yes, let's talk more.
Right.
But having said all that, and the book really lays out a lot of research that's been done by myself, but also many others and sociologists and others about what the phenomenon is, and also how people are psychologically drawn into such a thing. And I don't believe people become nationalists first. I believe that they join a church because they want to be Christian first, and then the rhetoric envelops them. And so to talk to people across the divide, I think there are times when you get someone who's really embedded and a true believer, you don't. So I'm not saying you can always talk to everybody. And if you want to maintain relationship, there may be times when you have to agree to disagree, but let people know that you disagree. Let people know that you think there's another way to view all of it, but don't put yourself in danger. Don't put yourself in a position of feeling like to have a conversation would compromise your values, and put your energy into other things like education and social change. But for people where you feel like there's a really good groundwork of relationship already established, and that you can build upon other things that you have in common, and in fact, common values, such as underneath it all, wishing that everyone can do well in America and in the world, and that wishing that God wants us to flourish, that if we can find some common values and common ground, then it may be possible to put a toe in the water. And at that point, I say, we have to listen more than we speak. One of my former doctoral students used to say, out of his Black church tradition, God gave us one mouth, but two ears. And so to at least try to understand what's their context, where are they coming from? What is it that appeals to them about this set of values around taking America back for Jesus Christ's second coming? What is it that is compelling them? And to try to understand their life circumstances may make it possible not to agree, but to say, aha, I get why you're coming from that position. And then let me share a little bit about where I'm coming from. And if you listen long enough with enough empathy, it may be possible to be heard. And especially with family members, with people in the pews next to us, it's important to be able to establish some kind of dialogue where maybe gradually over time, if you can listen to them, they might be able to listen to you.
Yeah.
It's a project for the long haul. We're not going to instantly change people's minds who've gone down the rabbit hole. And I don't remember the percentage offhand, but there's a very large percentage of evangelical Christians who are also have become vulnerable to conspiracy theories and to QAnon. It's been studied, and it's a sort of surprisingly disturbing percentage. But if you're already in a kind of a persecuted mindset, if you already believe that Christianity is under siege and that you have to fight, then it's not so great a distance to go to the other conspiracy theories that say that everybody's against you.
How is it easier to, I don't even know how I want to ask this question, but I'm thinking about all the signs and the shouting and the screaming and all that, we all know what happened with Roe v. Wade, and things that look like they have the potential to keep happening um, in this country. And they're, well, we have to be we're a Christian nation. I mean, we're not, and we've really never been a Christian nation so much. Um, is all of that part of that same listening conversation, or is
Oh, yeah.
that's a whole nother deal?
No, it's all part of the same package. I want to tread carefully here because
Right.
I respect that people can be pro-choice or can be pro-life, meaning wanting abortion not to be something that's taken lightly.
Yes.
Recognizing, and I do myself, I think that abortion is not to be taken lightly. The stance of the Episcopal Church, which is my church, is that, well, it's essentially abortion should be safe, legal, and rare.
Mm.
That, but that there are lives in balance in
Yes.
those situations. What happened historically is 20, 30 years ago, evangelical Protestants were not that involved in the anti-abortion movement. It was mostly a Catholic movement, which was part of a larger Catholic understanding of a seamless garment. That's the name that it's called, which is that life is precious at every end of the spectrum. And so it's anti-capital punishment. It's the great Catholic tradition of social welfare. All of that has to go together. And if you try to do one without the other, you're not living out the gospel according to the Catholic understanding. What happened was Catholic leaders, and we're talking about a rarefied level pretty much of male leadership, made a kind of a devil's alliance with white male leadership at the top of the evangelical Protestant church, which was, if you'll take up the abortion issue, then we will join forces with you and become more powerful politically in the conservative movement politically in this country. And that's what happened. And so suddenly you get pro-life positions that are severed from the seamless garment argument, because there's also other arguments that weigh against that. So, for example, Catholics are much less likely to want gun legislation that allows kind of a free range gun
Sure.
ownership and that sort of thing. Catholics are less likely to approve of that than evangelical Protestants. Evangelical Protestants have the largest number of gun owners in this country. White evangelical Protestants, actually, Black church Protestants have the least. And so gun ownership, capital punishment, other conservative values were put together with the white evangelical Protestant viewpoint. So it severed that seamless garment argument. And most mainline Protestant churches now, so Methodist, Episcopal, Presbyterian, I would put American Baptist in there, understand that it's a complex issue, and in general support the right of women to make that decision because they understand its complexities. They understand all of the contextual realities that come with that, the poverty, all of the things that surround a woman's choice, and say it's always tragic, but it should never be legislated because it's such a personal decision. So that's where I am on that issue. And as a psychotherapist, one of the things I want to talk about actually at the spiritual care conference is that we need to respect the complexity of persons, that we're not all one thing. We don't think all one thing all the time. And that's actually one of the things that can be helpful in having conversations with anybody you disagree with politically, is that nobody's monolithic. Nobody thinks the same thing all the time, every minute. And if you understand that, and you understand that there are also a lot of unconscious dynamics that are going on that come from family life, that come from the society around us, the culture that we're surrounded by, by our economic circumstances. All of those things are internal to us. They're not just conscious all the time. And so when we're talking to somebody, we're really talking to a lot of people within one
Right.
body. And that understanding is something that can't grow in a relationship in a short New York minute. You need time to develop a relationship in order to be able to understand the complexity of where people are coming from.
Yeah. So, an Episcopal priest, right? Author of, we're looking at 10 books, pastor, teacher, preacher. You know, how did you did you grow up a child of um, ministers? How
No,
did you get here?
well, no, although no, I didn't. But my mother was a staunch Episcopalian. My father, who grew up in Texas, was a Southern Methodist who joined the Episcopal Church when he married my mother and moved to the Boston area. My grandmother, my mother's mother, came from a long, one of my interests is genealogy. She came from a long line of transcendentalists and people in Concord, Massachusetts. Ralph Waldo Emerson is back there somewhere as an uncle. And she had a very philosophical bent. And so I think between my mother's kind of Episcopal, she was a piano teacher, love of beauty, love of the arts, love of, the Episcopal Church is full of beauty and stained glass windows and things that touch parts of us that are not necessarily just our intellect. You'd see a stained glass window over here in my corner in my study. Together with my grandmother's kind of free-thinking philosophical mindset, and also coming from a line of abolitionists from Concord, Massachusetts from that era. I think those were the influences. They were more spiritual and intellectual influences as opposed to, we're pastors, so you're going to be a pastor. My mother actually wanted me to follow her footsteps and be a musician, and I did that for quite a while in my younger career. And then my father was just a really good man, and he worked his way through General Electric Company. He was a provider. He was a Mason. And so, throughout my upbringing, I think I was exposed to just surrounded by books all the time, being taken to the library, be a thinker. And fortunately, my class, the people that I went to school with, also my niche, I was kind of a nerdy kid, but I also was an artistic kid. So that helped a little. And that was my niche growing up. So all of this stuff goes all the way back. And I think one of the things about getting close to retirement, I'm not there yet, but getting close to retirement is I'm really thinking about how do you regather all of those things that were of value to you from the very beginning. And even, being outdoors and in nature and being in the garden, and all of those things are coming back to me. They're roaring back to me as things I want to do as I think about retiring from institutional life.
Nerdy and artsy is cool now. So
yeah, there you go.
So you're all good. You're all good. I love that you don't have to just like pin it on one moment, that you can tell a beautiful story with your history, and to be able to say, talk about your parents like that, and just, my father was a good man, and that we would all have fathers that are good men. Mine is as well, but that just support us in the becoming of who we are. So as we think about that spiritual caregivers conference, is there any little thing that you might want to share about it?
Well, we were talking before we went live about how COVID has changed things. And in one way, it has brought chaplaincy to the fore, as people have now understood that chaplains are first responders and that
Yes.
pastoral care is an incredibly important vocation during this time. And we're not out of the pandemic yet. But I think also the whole range of pastoral care and counseling and psychotherapy addresses mental health issues that intertwine with spiritual issues. And after COVID, we all experienced isolation in different ways. A friend of mine, Bonnie Perry, who's a bishop in Detroit, likes the phrase how the pandemic, we all were in the same storm, but we didn't all have the same boats.
Mm-hmm.
And so how do we provide care and counseling for people whose boats weren't sound? They were leaking. They were caught in the waves and in the worst of this. And how do we now hold those folks, understanding what they went through and how hard that was and how the isolation impacted them? We know that domestic violence increased during the time of isolation because, in fact, isolation is one of the things that abusers impose anyway. And child abuse increased during the time. And, there's a whole generation of people who now didn't get the schooling that most of us had the privilege to receive. And many people, even in my generation, did not have that privilege. So I'm always looking at the ways in which psychoanalytic understandings of unconscious and conscious and dynamics intersect with the social change that's needed, because our psyches are not just formed by our families, but they're formed by the entire context around us. So that's one really important thing. And then the other thing I really want to talk about is just, as although it seems like you're not doing enough sometimes, and it feels paradoxical, that a non-directive approach, like I said before about listening, I really, really believe in empathic listening. I think it's healing in itself. And the less prescriptive we are, the less we are assigning people homework or giving them Bible verses to study, the more we really try to understand what's going on inside of them in all their multiplicity, is a way that we can become more responsive to each individual in their own unique way. And that when that happens, when that healing happens, it also can release their own unique giftedness and their own unique creativity. So that's very much where I come from philosophically as a therapist. And I teach non-directive listening at the seminary. I've been teaching that course wherever I've been for about 30 years. And people at the beginning, they're resistant. I teach them to the first session, we listen in silence, and they're like, and then they do it. And so they find it hard sometimes not to interject anything in 2 minutes. But 2 minutes starts to feel like forever. But so often the students will then say, wow, I didn't realize how much would come out if I just got out of the way.
Isn't it amazing?
So that's the foundation of everything that I teach about pastoral care and counseling.
Well, I very much look forward to meeting you in person there. But before I go, I want to ask you that question that I told you I ask everybody. So this is the joy question.
Right.
What in your ministry? Because I truly believe, all that we do is a ministry. What in your ministry brings you joy?
I think relationships. Even as these 3 years as dean and vice president, where most of my work day to day was administrative, what really gave me joy was working with a team of amazing colleagues and at several levels in the institution, and being able to solve problems that students would bring or to help the team to solve those problems. It's relational work. And I also think what gives me joy in congregational life is whether I'm preaching or whether I'm at the coffee hour or whatever it is that I'm doing, I don't particularly like parachuting in as a guest preacher in places where I don't know people and I don't know what's on their hearts, because I like to be able to have it be part of an ongoing conversation, even when I'm in the pulpit. And so I think the deeper those relationships get and the more we understand one another as people, to me, that's where those sparkles of divinity actually begin to come up in between people and in community. So one of the things I'm most longing for, and I think that the church has a real role to play post COVID, is we have found new ways of being in community. I think that's a valuable learning that we've had, that you really can do community over Zoom. But at the same time, I think the yearning people have had to come back together and be together, and that sense of being embodied together again, the church can be a place where that can happen again, and to reach out to those who've been isolated and to bring them back out of loneliness into community. So community and relationship, those are what give me joy.
So I'm going to, at the below our recording, put in there the links for your faculty page at Union Seminary, which has your contact information, even though you're on sabbatical. And I am just going to encourage those who watch this video to please consider coming out and joining us for the Spiritual Caregivers Conference. Stay for Space for Grace. Come and meet Dr. Pamela Cooper-White and her colleagues that come and just be a part of it. Be a part of community and form those relationships. They always laugh at me here because I make friends wherever I go, like on the airplanes and all that stuff. And they're always the most unique people. But I get it. I'm relational like that. So I thank you again, Dr. Cooper-White, for your time. I'm grateful for the way that you use the gifts that God has given you to serve, and look forward to meeting you in person, and hope that others will come out and join us as well. So
Well, I look forward to seeing you September 19th, I believe it is.
Yeah, yeah.
And thank you for having me on this program.
Yes,
Appreciate it.
thank you so much. So, and thank you for watching.